The ring hit the table before she said a word. It was small, gold, worn thin at the band, with a shallow engraving on the inside that nobody in the room could read from where they sat. The sound it made against the dark wood was softer than anyone expected, not a demand, not a threat, just a fact, arriving in a room that had not asked for any facts tonight. Nara Cole pulled her hand back and stood very still in the middle of a private dining room she had not been invited into, surrounded by 6 men who had all stopped breathing at slightly different moments. She had walked through the wrong door, or the right one, depending on what the address on that slip of paper had intended. Her mother had kept it folded inside an old jewelry box for at least 12 years, tucked under a broken watch, and 2 receipts for things that no longer existed. Nara had found the ring the same afternoon she found the box, 3 days after the funeral, while going through the apartment alone because there was no one else to do it. The ring had no note attached. The address had no explanation. She had spent 2 days convincing herself not to come, and then she had come anyway. Because she was 26 years old, and she had never once in her life been able to leave a question sitting unanswered on a table. The restaurant was called Pharaoh. It occupied the ground floor of a building on the west side of downtown that did not advertise, did not take reservations through any app she could find, and had a front door that a man in a dark jacket opened for her without being asked, which should have been her first signal to turn around. The host inside had looked at her the way people look at weather they were not expecting. She had said she was there to return something. He had made a phone call. She had waited 4 minutes in the entryway, and then a different man had walked her through a narrow corridor and opened a door at the end of it, and she had stepped into this room, and here she was. The man at the head of the table had not moved since the ring touched the wood. He was younger than she had expected, though she could not have said what she had expected. Dark suit, no tie, one hand resting flat on the table beside a glass of wine he had not touched in the past 2 minutes. His face was the kind that gave nothing away, not because it was trained to, but because there was simply nothing available to give no flicker of surprise, no social adjustment, no performance of calm, just stillness. The kind that lived in a person so deep it had stopped being a choice a long time ago. He was looking at the ring. He had been looking at it for what Nara counted as 8 full seconds, which was long enough that the man to his left had shifted in his chair and the man to his right had placed both hands on the table in a way that was probably not accidental. Nobody spoke. The room smelled like garlic and candle wax, and something underneath both of those things that Nara did not have a name for. "My mother passed away last week," she said, because the silence had reached the point where filling it was the only reasonable option. "I found this in her things. There was an address. This address." She paused. "I assumed someone had lost it." The man at the head of the table finally looked up. His eyes were dark, and they moved to her face with the kind of deliberate slowness that made her feel she was being read rather than seen, not assessed for threat or for beauty or for category read, the way you read something written in a language you already know but have not encountered in a very long time. "What was her name?" he said. Not a question, a requirement. "Eleanor Cole." Nara kept her voice level. She went by Ellie. Nothing moved in his face, not one thing, but something shifted. She felt it the way you feel a change in air pressure before a storm, not with any specific sense, but with all of them at once. Slightly wrong, slightly too much. "And your father?" he said. The question landed differently than the first one. Nara felt it in her chest before she processed it in her head. A small, cold drop of something she could not immediately identify. "Why would you ask that?" she said. "Because I want to know." His voice was even, not hostile, not warm, simply factual in the way that very powerful people sometimes were. people who had stopped dressing their requirements up as requests so long ago. They had forgotten that such dressing was customary. She held his gaze for a moment. The man to his left, older, heavier, with the particular watchfulness of someone who had built a career out of noticing things other people missed, had not taken his eyes off her since she had entered the room. She was aware of him the way she was aware of a door that might be locked. "Martin Cole," she said. "He left when I was 10. I don't have much information about him." The man at the head of the table looked back at the ring. This time it was not 8 seconds. It was closer to 3, and then he picked it up slowly, with 2 fingers, as if the object required that kind of care or that kind of caution. She could not tell which, and he turned it once in the light. She saw his jaw tighten by a fraction. Then he set it down again in exactly the same spot she had placed it, and he looked up at her, and for one moment she had the disorienting sense that he knew something about her that she did not know about herself. "Sit down," he said. "I wasn't planning to stay." "Sit down," he said again. Still the same tone. Not louder, not harder, just repeated. The way you repeat a thing when you are accustomed to only having to say it once. Nara did not sit down. "I came to return the ring. I've done that. I don't know why it was in my mother's things or what it means to you. And I didn't come here for a conversation." She picked up the strap of her bag from where it had slipped off her shoulder. "I'm sorry for taking up your time." She turned toward the door. "Your father did not leave." She stopped. The room was very quiet. Someone in the kitchen behind the walls dropped something metal, and the sound came through, muffled and distant. And then there was nothing. Nara turned back around. He was watching her with that same expression that was not quite an expression, that same absence of performance, and the ring was still on the table between them. And the man to his left had gone very still in a way that felt different from how he had been still before. "What did you say?" she said. "Sit down," he said. "Please." The please surprised her more than anything else that had happened in the past 4 minutes. She sat. His name was Dominic Vasquez. She did not know this, yet he did not offer it, and she did not ask. Because the air in the room had shifted into something that made asking feel like a smaller concern than listening. He did not say anything else about her father. He asked her 3 questions in the following 7 minutes: how long ago her mother had passed, whether she had any other family in the city, and whether she had come alone tonight. She answered the first 2 honestly. On the third, she hesitated long enough that he nodded, as if her hesitation were itself an answer, and she realized it probably was. When she left, the ring stayed on the table. She had not intended to leave it, but at some point in those 7 minutes she had understood. In the wordless way, you understand certain things. That returning it had not been the end of something. It had been the beginning of something she did not have a shape for yet, and taking the ring back out of this room felt like trying to unring a bell. The man to his left watched her go. His name was Enzo Vasquez, and he was 53 years old, and he had survived in this business by understanding before anyone else did when a thing that looked small was not small at all. He waited until the door closed. Then he looked at his nephew. Dominic had not moved. He was looking at the space where the ring sat, and his face was exactly what it always was, which was nothing, which told Enzo precisely what he needed to know. "Dominic," he said. "Not tonight," Dominic said. Enzo picked up his wine. He did not press. He had learned, over 20 years, when pressing would cost more than it returned. But he turned the name over in his mind as he drank Martin Cole, Nara Cole, a girl who looked nothing like her father and everything like the kind of trouble that arrived quietly and stayed, and he filed it carefully in the part of his mind where he kept the things that would matter later. Outside, Nara stood on the sidewalk in the November cold and looked at her own hands for a moment. Her father had not left. She did not know what that meant. She did not know how a man in a private dining room surrounded by people who had stopped breathing when she walked in could possibly know what had happened to her father 16 years ago. She did not know why she had believed him, except that she had, completely. The way you believe certain things that arrive without explanation but land with the weight of something you already knew. She put her hands in her pockets and walked toward the subway, and she did not look back, and the ring stayed on the table in the room behind her. And somewhere in the city, Dominic Vasquez sat alone after the others had gone and turned it over once more in the light before he put it in his inside pocket. In the same place he had kept it for 12 years, against the left side of his chest. The job offer arrived by messenger at 7:45 the following morning. Nara was still in her mother's apartment, her apartment now, she supposed, though the word sat strangely standing in the kitchen in yesterday's clothes with a cup of coffee she had made and not drunk. Staring at the stack of unopened condolence cards on the counter, the messenger was a young man in a dark coat who handed her an envelope and left before she could ask who had sent it. Inside was a single card, heavy stock, no logo, a position title, a start date 3 days from now, an address in the financial district, and a salary number that she read twice because the first time she thought she had misread it. She had not misread it. The position was administrative coordinator at a company called Faro Holdings. She knew that name. She had looked it up the night before, after she got home, and found a real estate development firm with a clean website and a list of commercial properties and a board of directors that told her nothing useful, and a CEO whose name did not appear anywhere on the public record, which was itself a kind of information. She should not take it. She took it. This was not a decision she was proud of or confused by. She had $900 in her checking account. First and last month's rent due in 3 weeks, on an apartment she could not afford to keep, but also could not afford to break the lease on. A part-time copy editing job that covered approximately 60% of her expenses in a good month. And a question about her father that had been sitting in her chest for 16 years and had not gotten any lighter. The salary on the card was not a coincidence, and she knew it was not a coincidence, and she took the job anyway, because she was her mother's daughter. And her mother had kept a ring and an address in a jewelry box for 12 years without explaining either one to anyone, and whatever gene produced that particular kind of stubbornness had apparently passed cleanly down the line. She started on a Thursday. Faro Holdings occupied 4 floors of a glass building 3 blocks from the river. Her workspace was on the 22nd floor, an open-plan office where most people seemed to know their jobs well enough not to need much explaining. Her manager was a woman named Celine who was efficient and pleasant and answered exactly the questions Nara asked, without volunteering anything Nara did not ask about, which Nara recognized as a skill that took years to develop. The work itself was straightforward, coordinating schedules, managing correspondence, organizing logistics for meetings that Nara was not part of and whose attendees she was not introduced to. She did not see Dominic Vasquez for the first 4 days. On the 5th day, she arrived at 8 in the morning to find the 22nd floor emptied of most of its usual staff, replaced by 3 men in dark jackets standing near the elevator bank. The elevator doors opened, and Dominic stepped out, and he walked through the office with the particular quality of movement that she had noticed in the restaurant, not hurried, not slow, simply efficient, as if his body had long ago stopped wasting energy on anything that was not the direction he intended to go. He did not look at her as he passed. Then, approximately 6 feet past her desk, he stopped. He turned. "Cole," he said. "Yes," she said. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "Good morning," and continued walking. It was the most ordinary thing she had heard in the past week and a half, and it unbalanced her more than anything else had. She watched him go and then looked back at her screen and understood something she had been refusing to understand since she walked into that restaurant She was not here because Dominic Vasquez had done her a favor. She was here because he had decided she should be here, for reasons that had nothing to do with her qualifications and everything to do with that ring and whatever it meant to him. And she had walked into this arrangement with her eyes open, because she had made a calculation that the answer to her question was worth the risk of being this close to whatever he was. She was either right about that, or she was going to deeply regret it. From the 44th floor, Dominic stood at the window of his office and looked down at the street below and thought about the last time he had felt uncertain about something. He was not used to it. Uncertainty was a condition he had trained out of himself early, because in his world it was a liability, not weakness exactly, but a gap in the wall where something could get in. He had spent 15 years building walls with no gaps. He ran the Vasquez family's legitimate interests with the same precision he ran its other interests, which was to say absolutely, with contingencies planned for contingencies, with no variable left unexamined, and no outcome he had not already mapped before it arrived. Nara Cole was a variable he had not planned for. He had known she existed. He had known her name, her mother's name, her address, her employment history, her graduate degree in comparative literature that she was not using, the coffee shop she went to 3 mornings a week, the library branch she used most often. He had known all of this for 4 years, because knowing it was the closest thing to penance that a man in his position could manage, keeping track of the damage without being able to repair it, watching from a distance to make sure the damage did not compound. He had not planned for her to walk into Ferro with a ring in her hand. He had not planned for her to sit across from him with her jaw set and her eyes direct, and to refuse to be intimidated by a room full of people who intimidated everyone, and then to stand up and leave before he asked her to, which nobody did. He had not planned for the particular quality of her stillness when he told her that her father had not left the way she had stopped completely, not with shock, but with something older and heavier, the way a person stops when they hear a truth that has been living in them as a question for a long time. He had her close where he could watch her. That was the practical reasoning, and it was not untrue. If she started asking questions, and she would start asking questions, he needed to know which direction she was looking before she found anything. That was the reason. He turned away from the window. On the 11th floor, in a smaller office he used for meetings he did not want held on the 44th, Enzo Vasquez was on his phone. "Martin Cole," he said. "I want everything we have on the daughter. Cross-reference with what we pulled 12 years ago." He paused. "No, don't tell Dominic." Another pause. "Longer, because I said so. Because there are things in this situation that my nephew is not thinking clearly about, and I intend to think clearly about them for him." He ended the call and looked out his own window at a different piece of the same city and turned the situation over in his mind, the way he had been turning it over since Tuesday night. Dominic had looked at that ring the way a man looks at a wound he has been carrying so long he had forgotten it was a wound. Enzo had not seen his nephew look like that at anything in 20 years. That look was information. And information, in Enzo's experience, was either an asset or a liability depending entirely on who held it. He intended to hold it. That evening, after most of the staff had gone, Enzo appeared at the door of Nara's workspace. He was the kind of man who could make appearing at a door seem like an accident. And he was doing that now, relaxed, half smiling, one hand in his jacket pocket. "Miss Cole," he said, "I wanted to introduce myself. I'm Enzo. I work with Dominic." He let a beat pass. "He mentioned you came to return something of his." "He mentioned that," she said. "It was not quite a question. He's a private person." Enzo's tone was light, easy. The kind of easy that took practice. He doesn't always express gratitude the way most people do. "I wanted to make sure someone said it directly." He smiled. "So, thank you." For going out of your way. Nara looked at him for a moment. He had good instincts. She thought the kind of man who had learned to make people feel seen. Because making people feel seen was useful. She had met enough people in her life who used warmth as a tool that she could usually recognize the mechanism. It wasn't out of my way, she said. Good night, Enzo. He left. She closed the program she had been working in and sat for a moment with her hands in her lap and thought about the fact that Dominic Vasquez had mentioned to his colleague that she had returned something of his, which meant he had spoken about her, which meant he was managing how information about her moved through this environment, which meant she was being managed. She was being managed by someone who ran, based on everything she could find and everything she could not find, what appeared to be, at minimum, a significant portion of the organized crime infrastructure of this city. She got her coat and took the elevator down and walked to the subway, and did not let herself think about her father until she was through the turnstile, and then she thought about nothing else. She found the photograph on a Wednesday morning, the kind of grey November Wednesday that made the city feel like a room with the windows painted over. She had been sent upstairs with a set of files that needed signatures, a routine task, the kind Celine had been assigning her more often in the past week, and she had read no particular significance into it until the assistant outside Dominic's office told her to go in and leave the files on the desk because he was on a call and would be back in 10 minutes. Nara went in. She set the files on the corner of the desk. She was on her way back to the door when she saw it. It was propped against the far edge of the desk, half behind a monitor, the way objects end up when they are not quite put away and not quite displayed, a photograph in a plain frame, 4 by 6, the kind that held a single moment without comment, 2 men standing in front of what looked like a boatyard, late afternoon light, the water visible behind them. One of the men was older, mid-50s, perhaps broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that had been handsome once and was now something more settled. The other man was younger, maybe 30, turned slightly away from the camera so that his face was only partially visible. Nara recognized the older man. Not immediately. It came in layers. The way recognition comes when you are looking at a face you have not seen in 16 years and last saw in photographs your mother eventually put away. The jaw, first, then the way his weight was distributed, slightly forward, as if he was about to say something, then the particular way he held his hands at his sides. She picked up the photograph. She was still looking at it when the door opened behind her. She turned. Dominic stood in the doorway. He took in the photograph in her hands with no change of expression, and then he crossed the room and took it from her gently, which was the part that surprised her, and set it face down on the desk. "Who is that man?" she said. "The older one." "Someone who is no longer relevant," he said. He moved to the other side of the desk and sat, and opened the files she had brought, as if the conversation had already ended. "He looked like my father," she said. Nothing moved in Dominic's face. "The light in that photograph is poor. I know what my father looked like." He looked at her. Then he looked down at the file in front of him. "Is there anything else you need from me today?" Cole. It was a dismissal, and she knew it was a dismissal, and she left, because pressing further in that room with him on the other side of that desk felt like pressing on a door that opened inward, and she did not yet know what was behind it. She went back to her floor. She sat at her desk and did not work. She thought about the angle of the light in the photograph and the way the older man's jaw had sat below a face she had been building from memory for 16 years, patching together from the 3 photos her mother had kept and then put away and then, at some point, apparently stopped keeping at all. That evening she went home and opened her laptop, and for the first time since she was 19 and had made herself stop, she searched her father's name with intention. Martin Cole, Chicago originally, moved to New York in the late 90s, married Elena Park in 2001, 1 daughter. Last known address a neighborhood in Queens that Nara had grown up in and moved out of at 22. And then nothing. The usual shape of a life that had ended or vanished, a few old address listings. A social security number that stopped appearing in records after a certain year, and in a local news archive. A small item from 2010, 3 paragraphs. A man reported missing by his wife. No evidence of foul play. Case closed. No evidence of foul play. She read it 3 times. She closed the laptop and sat in the dark for a while. Across the city, Dominic sat in the back of a car and looked out the window at streets he had moved through for 34 years. The car stopped in front of a building in the Bronx, a walk-up. 6 floors. The kind of building that had been there long enough to have seen several versions of the neighborhood around it. He went up alone. 3rd floor. Apartment 7. The man who opened the door was 71 and looked older. His name was Sal, and he had been with the Vasquez family for 30 years, before a stroke 2 years ago had taken enough of his mobility that retirement became the only option. Dominic had been to this apartment 4 times before. Each time, he had told himself it would be the last. He sat in the chair across from the old man, and they talked about ordinary things for a few minutes. The way you do when you are managing the distance before you say what you came to say. Then Dominic said it. She came to the restaurant. The daughter. Sal was quiet for a moment. How? Her mother kept the address, with the ring. Another silence. Sal shifted in his chair and looked at the window, which looked at a brick wall. 12 years, he said. Yes. And now she's there, in the building. I needed her close. Sal turned back to him. His eyes were still clear, whatever else the stroke had taken. Why? Dominic did not answer, which was itself an answer, and Sal received it as such, and looked at the window again. She's going to find out, Sal said. That kind of girl. With that kind of question they don't stop. I've seen it. They find a thread, and they pull, and they don't stop pulling even when they can see the whole thing is going to come apart. He paused. They always find out. I know, Dominic said. Then what are you doing? Dominic did not answer this either. He sat for another few minutes and then said good night, and let himself out, and went back down the stairs and into the car. What he was doing, he had been asking himself the same question for 10 days and had not arrived at an answer that satisfied him, which was an experience so unfamiliar it had taken him several days to recognize it for what it was. He was not a man who lingered in unresolved questions. He resolved them. He gathered information, identified the optimal outcome, and moved toward it with the same efficiency he brought to everything. The optimal outcome here was clear. Nara Cole went back to her life. The ring went back into his pocket. The secret stayed buried. That was the optimal outcome. He had been moving toward it for 12 years without effort, simply by staying away. And then she had walked into Fero with her jaw set, and her direct eyes, and the ring in her hand, and the particular way. She had said, I know what my father looked like. And he had found himself, for the first time in a very long time, unable to identify with certainty what he was moving toward. In the hallway outside Sal's apartment, a shadow had paused at the stairwell door long enough to hear the last part of the conversation. Then it continued up the stairs and out to the roof, where a phone call was placed to a number saved under no name at all. It's moving faster than I thought, Enzo said. Adjust the timeline. He listened for a moment. No, gently. For now, nothing that can't be walked back. He looked out at the city. Just make sure she finds the right things. In the right order. I want her to have questions before she has answers. Questions are more useful. He ended the call and stood in the cold for a moment, and then went back downstairs, and the city went on around him the way it always did. Indifferent and enormous, holding all its secrets in the same dark. Nara did not sleep that night. She lay in the dark of her mother's bedroom. She had not been able to make herself sleep in her old room, the small one, the one that still had a crack in the ceiling shaped like a river, and she stared at the ceiling and thought about the word missing and the word foul, and the way those two words had been placed next to each other in 3 paragraphs of a local news item that no one had followed up on. No evidence of foul play. She had been 10 years old when her father stopped coming home. Her mother had said he left. Her mother had said it with a flatness that Nara had interpreted. Adten, as hurt the particular flatness of a woman who had been abandoned and had decided not to perform her grief for an audience that included her own child. Nara had believed her. She had believed her at 10, and at 14, and at 19, when she made herself stop searching, and she had carried that belief for 16 years like a stone in her coat pocket. Something heavy that she had gotten used to and stopped noticing until it shifted. He did not leave. A man in a private dining room, surrounded by men who did not breathe without permission, had said that to her, and she had believed him. Completely and immediately, which was itself information she needed to sit with. She was not the kind of person who believed things without evidence. She had been trained out of that, first by her mother's flatness, and then by her own adult understanding of how much of the world ran on comfortable fictions. She believed in evidence. She believed in the specific weight of facts over the vague weight of feelings. And yet, she had believed him. She had sat in that chair and watched his face and listened to his voice and believed him with a certainty she could not explain and could not dismiss. And she had been sitting with that belief for 10 days now, turning it over the way he had turned over the ring, looking for the thing it was made of. She thought about the photograph, the angle of the light, the older man's jaw, the way Dominic had taken the frame from her hands gently, which was not the gesture of someone who had nothing to hide, but was the gesture of someone who understood that the hiding had consequences and had made a choice to absorb them anyway. Someone who is no longer relevant. She said it out loud in the dark. To no one. To the cracked ceiling. It came out sounding more tired than anything else. She got up at 5:30 and made coffee and sat at the kitchen table and opened the notes she had started keeping in a document on her phone, not a journal. She told herself. Just a record. Just the shape of things arranged in order so she could see the pattern. The ring. The address. The restaurant. The way the room had stopped. The 8 seconds. What was your father's name? The job offer. The photograph. The missing persons item. 3 paragraphs. Closed case. No evidence of foul play. She added a new line at the bottom. Dominic Vasquez knows more than he has said. She looked at that line for a moment. Then she added another, so does Enzo. She put her phone face down on the table and looked out the window at the city beginning to come into its morning light, grey and flat, and going about its business. And she thought about what it meant to be in a building owned by a man who knew something about her father's disappearance and had not told her, and what it meant that she was going to go back there today anyway, because she did not yet have enough, and she needed more, and the only place to get more was closer in, not further out. She was either right about this, or she was not. She poured the rest of her coffee into the sink, got dressed, and went to work. The folder landed on Nara's desk at 11:43 on a Thursday morning, placed there by a hand she did not see because she was looking at her screen when it happened. When she looked up, the hallway outside her workspace was empty. The folder was manila, unmarked, the kind that held documents without announcing what they were. She should not have opened it. She knew, in the way you know things that you are not ready to act on yet, that opening it would change the shape of the next several hours in ways she could not undo. She sat with it closed in front of her for approximately 90 seconds. Then she opened it. Photographs. First. 8 of them, printed on plain paper, slightly grainy in the way of images that had been copied from originals. Her father, younger than she had seen him in any photo she owned, standing in locations she did not recognize: a parking garage, a warehouse loading dock, what appeared to be the back entrance of a restaurant. In two of the photographs he was with other men. In one of those two, one of the other men was someone Nara recognized, though it took her a moment to place him older now, heavier, but the eyes were the same. She had seen those eyes sitting at the head of a table in a private dining room. Dominic's father. She did not know how she knew, except that she did. Behind the photographs, a document, 3 pages, dense with the particular language of internal records that had been typed on a machine rather than a computer, which placed it sometime in the mid-90s to early 2000s. A name at the top, a date, and a series of entries that read like a ledger or a log, tracking meetings and locations, and, near the bottom of the second page, a decision recorded in 2 sentences with the same blunt efficiency as everything above it. The name at the bottom was not Dominic Vasquez, it was Rafael Vasquez, and below the name was a signature that had been signed with the confidence of someone who had never expected anyone outside this document to read it. The last item in the folder was a photograph of her father alone. Not a surveillance photo like the others, a personal photo, the kind taken at close range by someone who knew him. He was laughing, looking slightly off camera, his collar open, and behind him was a boatyard that Nara had seen in another photograph on a desk on the 44th floor of this building. She closed the folder. She sat for a moment with her hands flat on top of it. Then she picked up her bag, put the folder inside, and took the elevator to 44. The assistant outside Dominic's office started to say something. Nara walked past her. She opened the door. Dominic was standing at the window with his back to the room, phone to his ear. He turned when the door opened. He looked at her face and ended the call without saying anything to whoever was on the other end, and he set the phone on the desk and waited. She put the folder on the desk between them. She did not open it. She did not need to. "How long?" she said. He looked at the folder. Then he looked at her. "Sit down. How long have you known who I am?" A pause. "Since Tuesday night, when you told me your father's name." "That's not what I asked." She kept her voice level. "It required more effort than she would have liked. The photograph in your office, the one you took back, that was taken at a boatyard. There is a photograph in this folder, also taken at a boatyard, with my father in it. That photograph is not new. So I am asking you again, how long have you known who I am?" The silence this time was different from the other silences she had sat in with him. Those had been controlled, the silence of a man who chose when to speak with the same deliberateness he brought to everything else. This one had a different texture, heavier, the kind that comes before something that cannot be unsaid. 4 years, he said. The number landed somewhere in the middle of her chest. 4 years. She had walked into this building 9 days ago, and he had known for 4 years. She thought about the job offer arriving by messenger at 7:45 in the morning, the salary that was not a coincidence, the way Celine answered exactly the questions Nara asked without volunteering anything else. "You've been watching me," she said. "Yes." "For 4 years." "Yes." She looked at him for a long moment. He did not look away, and he did not add anything. And she understood that he was not going to offer her a version of this that was easier to hold than the true one, which was either the only honest thing he had done since she walked into Pharaoh, or was itself another kind of management, and she could not yet tell which. "The document in this folder," she said, "there is a name at the bottom. Rafael Vasquez. My father, your father ordered the death of my father." The word death. She had not planned to say it that plainly. It arrived that way, and she did not take it back. Dominic was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Yes." The room was very still. Outside the windows the city went on in its enormous, indifferent way. 44 floors below, the sound of it entirely absent from where they stood. "Tell me," she said. He told her. He told her the parts she could have assembled from the folder and the parts she could not have. He told her that her father had been a witness to something he should not have witnessed, not deliberately, not as an informant, simply a man in the wrong place who had seen the wrong thing and who the Vasquez organization of that era had decided could not be trusted to stay quiet. He told her that his father had given an order, and the order had been carried out in 2010, and that her father had been buried in a location that Dominic knew and had not disclosed to anyone outside the organization. He told her all of this in the same even voice he used for everything, without flinching and without asking her to accept it as anything other than what it was. Then he told her the part she had not expected. "I was 18 when I found the record," he said. "I was going through my father's files for a different reason. I found it." He paused. "I found the ring with it. Your father had it on him. Someone had kept it." A shorter pause. "I don't know why. I kept it after." "Why?" she said. "Because I could not do anything else with it that meant anything. I could not return it. I did not know where your mother was. I did not know if she would want it." He looked at the folder on the desk. "I carried it because it was the only way I knew to keep a record of what had been done, to not let it become nothing." Nara was very quiet. "Your father," Dominic said, "and 2 years later I made sure my father could not do it to anyone else." She looked up. He met her eyes and held them, and she understood what he was saying. She understood the shape of it even before she had words for it, that Rafael Vasquez had died in what had been, recorded as a car accident, and that Dominic had been 20 years old, and that he had carried that too, alone, in the same interior place where he had carried the ring. She stood up. She needed to stand. She needed to be moving, or she needed the walls to be further away. She was not sure which. She walked to the window and stood where he had been standing and looked out at the city and pressed her palm flat against the cold glass and breathed. He said nothing. He did not come to stand near her. He did not offer comfort in any form, which was the right thing, which she recognized as the right thing even now, because there was no comfort available, and offering it would have been a performance neither of them could sustain. After a long time, she said, without turning around, "He didn't leave." "No," Dominic said. "He did not leave." She stood at the window for another minute. Then she took her hand off the glass and picked up her bag from the chair. She looked at the folder on his desk. "Keep it," he said. "It's yours." She picked it up. She walked to the door. He did not call her back, and she did not pause. And she did not let herself think about the way he had looked standing behind her in the reflection of the glass, not relieved, not unburdened, just present, the way a person is present when they have put down something very heavy and are not yet sure their hands remember what it felt like to be empty. She took the elevator down and walked through the lobby and out into the cold, and she stood on the sidewalk and did not know where to go, which was a feeling she had had before, but never quite like this, not lost, not homeless, but newly positioned in a world that had just reorganized itself around a truth she had been carrying as a lie for 16 years. Her father had not left. He had been loved, and he had been taken, and he had been mourned by a woman who told her daughter a different story, because the truth was the kind of truth that could not be told to a 10-year-old. Not in that neighborhood, not with the shape of the world as it was. She walked. She did not go back to the office. She walked for 45 minutes through streets she had known for most of her life, and that looked, today, like a version of themselves she had not seen before. The same buildings, the same corners, the same grey sky pressing down on the same November city, but arranged around a different fact. The way a photograph changes meaning when you learn who took it. She stopped at a corner she had stood on 100 times growing up. There was a bodega on one side and a laundromat on the other, and a church at the end of the block whose sign she had, Read so many times she had stopped reading it years ago. She read it now. She could not have said why. The words were ordinary: a verse, a time, an invitation. She read it and did not retain it, and kept walking. Her father had not left. The shape of that fact kept arriving in her the way grief arrives, which is not in one wave but in many, and not predictably. She would be walking and thinking about something concrete: the folder, the document, the specific bureaucratic language of the entry on page 2, and then the fact would arrive again, sideways. Through a gap she had not been guarding, he had not left. He had been here. He had talked about her. He had told people her name. He had a ring in his pocket on the day he died, which meant he had been thinking about going home, and he had not gone home, and no one had told her. And she had spent 16 years carrying the weight of a story that was not true. She thought about her mother's face when she said the word left, the particular flatness she had interpreted, aten, as hurt. She understood now that it was not hurt. It was fear. Her mother had been a woman alone with a child, in a city where people disappeared, and the disappearances were not investigated, and you did not. If you wanted to keep your child safe, go asking the kinds of questions that drew attention to yourself. Her mother had told her a story because it was the safest story available. She had carried it for 12 years, until she died. And she had kept the ring and the address in a jewelry box because she had never fully let herself believe the story either. Nara stopped walking. She was standing outside a coffee shop she had been going to since she was 19. The kind of place that had not changed its furniture or its menu in 20 years and was somehow still there. Still open, with the same handwritten specials in the window. She went in. She ordered something she did not drink. She sat at a table by the window and watched the street and let the fact be what it was, and did not try to arrange it into anything manageable yet, because some things needed to be felt in their full weight before they could be carried. After a while she left a tip and walked out and kept walking. She did not cry. She had the feeling that she would, later, privately, and that it would take a long time. And that on the other side of it she might find some version of the thing she had been looking for since she was 10 years old. But not yet. Right now she walked, and the city held her the way it always had, which was not gently, but was at least consistently. She did not know that. 44 floors up. Dominic had moved back to the window after she left and was watching the street below, and found her a figure in a dark coat, walking without apparent destination, neither fast nor slow, and stood there until she turned a corner and was no longer visible. He stood at the window for another 7 minutes after that, which was 6 minutes and 45 seconds longer than he had stood still, doing nothing, in longer than he could remember. He had told her. He had sat across from her and told her everything, including the part he had not told anyone, not Sal, not the men who had worked for him longest. Not anyone. The part about the record and being 18, and what he had done 2 years later, and she had stood at his window with her hand flat against the glass and said he didn't leave, in a voice that was so quiet and so certain that he had felt it somewhere that had not been available to be felt in a very long time. He did not know what came after this. He understood, with unusual clarity, that he did not know, which was itself a new condition. He was a man who mapped outcomes. He was a man who did not move toward a thing until he had already mapped where the thing ended. He had no map for this. He had the folder and the ring and the address in New Jersey, and a woman walking through the city below him who now knew the shape of what he owed her. And he had no map for any of it, and he stood at the window and let that be true. He did not know that 20 minutes after she left the building, Enzo Vasquez called a number from a car parked 2 blocks east and said 4 words: "Move on, the girl." Dominic did not hear this call. If he had, the next several hours would have looked different, but he did not. And so when Nara's phone went dark at 8:17 that evening, not turned off, simply unreachable, he did not know about it until 9, when the man he had assigned to passive monitoring flagged it, and by then 43 minutes had already passed, and 43 minutes, in Dominic's experience, was long enough for almost anything to be finished. He was in the car within 4 minutes. The building was in Greenpoint, a converted warehouse that Enzo had held under a subsidiary for 11 years and used for the kind of conversations that required an absence of witnesses. Dominic knew the address because he knew all of Enzo's addresses, the way he knew all of the organization's assets and liabilities, which was to say completely and without having asked for a tour. He went in through the side entrance with 2 men. He did not announce himself. Nara was in a room on the 2nd floor, sitting in a chair with her coat still on and her bag still on her shoulder, which meant she had been brought here quickly and without the opportunity to set anything down, which meant whoever had collected her had not been gentle about the timeline. She was not bound. There was a man standing near the door who was approximately the size of a refrigerator and who moved his hand toward his jacket when Dominic walked in, and then stopped moving it when he understood who had walked in. Nara looked at Dominic. He looked at her. Her jaw was set in the way he had first seen it across a table in a restaurant, the particular set of a person who has decided that whatever is happening is not going to be allowed to become the worst thing that happens to them today. "Are you hurt?" he said. "No," she said. "Then stay here." He looked at the man near the door. "Leave." The man left. Enzo was in the next room. He was sitting at a table with a glass of water and the expression of a man who had been expecting this visit and had decided to receive it without the theater of pretending he had not. He looked, Dominic thought, like the version of himself that Dominic had known when he was 12 years old, and Enzo had been the most important adult in his life, besides his father composed. Intelligent, certain of the moral weight of his own position. "You should have come to me first," Enzo said. "There was nothing to come to you about. There was a girl who knew things she shouldn't know." Enzo's voice was measured. "There was a girl with a connection to something that should have stayed buried. You brought her inside. You kept her close. You talked to her." He set down his glass. "I watched you talk to her through a window. Dominic, you looked like someone I didn't recognize. She is not a threat to this organization. That is not your decision to make alone. It is exactly my decision to make alone." Dominic's voice had not changed in tone or volume, but something in it had shifted a quality that people who had worked with him long enough recognized, and that caused them to be very careful about what they said next. "She is not a threat. She is a woman whose father was killed by this family before either of us was old enough to have stopped it. And she has now received the truth about that. And she will leave this city if she wants to leave, or she will stay if she wants to stay. And neither of those outcomes is a problem that requires your management." Enzo looked at him for a long moment. "You told her?" "Yes." "Everything?" "Yes." The older man was quiet. Something moved across his face that was not quite surprise, more like the confirmation of a suspicion he had been carrying and had not wanted to confirm. He picked up his glass and set it down again without drinking. "Your father would have—" "My father is not here." The sentence arrived without inflection. It did not need any. "He is not here because I made sure he was not here. And the reason I did that and not you is that you would have made a different choice. And I have been aware of that for 20 years. And it is the reason that I run this organization and you advise it. Those are not the same role." Enzo said nothing. "You will not touch her," Dominic said. "You will not have her followed. You will not use her name in any conversation in any room I do not occupy. And you will, before I leave this building, give me the documentation you have been compiling on the Martin Cole case, including whatever you pulled from the archives last week. and whatever you have had your people building on Nara specifically. All of it. And if I don't, then I will call the council and present what I know about the Caruso contract from 2017, which you told me had been resolved cleanly, and which I have known for 3 years was not resolved cleanly. And we will have a different kind of conversation than this one. He waited 1 beat. I would prefer not to. You have been useful to this organization and to me personally, and I have no interest in burning what is left of our family over a conflict that did not need to exist. But I am not asking you. Enzo, I am telling you. The silence that followed was the kind that Dominic had learned to recognize as a man deciding which version of the future he could live with. He let it be what it was, and did not fill it. Enzo reached into his jacket and removed a folded envelope and set it on the table. Everything, Dominic said. That is everything, Enzo said. His voice was flat and very tired. You should know I didn't plan to hurt her. I planned to use her as a pressure point. There's a difference. There is not, Dominic said. Not to her. Not to me. He picked up the envelope. He left the room. He did not look back at his uncle, and Enzo did not call after him. And whatever had existed between them before tonight, the complicated architecture of family obligation and mutual utility that had held for 2 decades, settled into a new shape, smaller, cooler, still functional in the way that scar tissue is functional, which is to say, adequate and permanent. Nara was standing when he came back into the room. She had her bag over one shoulder, and she had been looking out the narrow window at the street below, and she turned when he entered. He held out the envelope. This is what he had on your father. Original documents, not copies. He paused. There is also a location. I had it written down before I came here. He watched her take the envelope. It is in New Jersey, a cemetery outside Trenton that the family has used for that the family has used. Your father's name is not on a marker, but the location is in there. She looked at the envelope in her hands. I should have given this to you differently, he said. I should have found a way. Years ago. He stopped. There was no version of that sentence that did not end in a place he could not honestly defend. There is no version of what I should have done that I actually did. I know that. She looked up at him. Her eyes were very steady. Not warm. Not cold, simply clear. In the way of someone who has recently been given a great deal to see and is seeing it without looking away. Why did you keep the ring? She said. I told you. Tell me again. He was quiet for a moment. Because I needed something to be responsible to, he said. Not a person, not a system, something real that had a weight, something I could not put down and forget. He looked at her hands, at the envelope. It was not enough. I know it was not enough, but it was what I had. She reached into her bag and took out the folder she had carried from his office, the photographs, the document. The last photograph of her father laughing at a boatyard, and held it against her chest for a moment. Then she looked at him. What happens to Enzo? She said. The council will be informed that he acted outside his authority. He will be removed from his advisory position. He will not be harmed. He said this plainly. I don't operate the way my father operated. I want you to know that, for whatever it is worth. She nodded slowly. It was not forgiveness. He did not mistake it for forgiveness. And he did not want her to offer it in a room in Greenpoint 40 minutes after being taken off the street. It was simply acknowledgement. She had heard him and she had filed the information and she was deciding what weight to give it, which was the most honest response available. Can someone take me home? She said. Yes, he said. I'll take you. She looked at him. You don't have to. I know, he said. They went downstairs and into the car, and the city moved past the windows. And for most of the ride, neither of them spoke. She held the folder and the envelope in her lap and looked out at the streets, and he looked at the streets from the other side of the car. and the silence between them was not uncomfortable, which was a thing he had not expected, not warm, not resolved, but not hostile either. The particular silence of two people who have been in a burning building together and have both come out and are not yet sure what to do with their hands. When the car stopped in front of her building, she reached for the door and then paused. "The ring," she said. He reached into his inside jacket pocket, the left side, against his chest, where it had lived for 12 years, and he held it out to her in his palm. She looked at it for a long moment without taking it. He waited. "This is not yours," she said. "No," he said. "It never was." She picked it up. It was lighter than she expected. She turned it once in the low light of the car, and she found the engraving on the inside, 2 initials and a date, worn thin from years of being handled, and she held it in her closed hand and looked out the window at her building and at the street she had grown up on, which looked tonight, in the November dark, both exactly as she had always known it and entirely different. "He didn't leave," she said. Not to Dominic specifically, to the window, to the street, to the 10-year-old version of herself who had believed a story for 16 years because it was the only story available. "No," Dominic said. "He loved you. The record is clear about that. He talked about you." He paused. "He told people your name." She turned and looked at him. He held her gaze. She got out of the car. She stood on the sidewalk and looked back in through the window, and he looked back at her, and neither of them said anything about what came next. There was no version of what came next that either of them could accurately predict, and they both knew it. And the knowing sat between them not as uncertainty, but as a kind of open space, unresolved. Yes, and also unfinished in the way that only living things are unfinished, which is to say not broken but continuing. She went inside. He sat in the car for a moment after she was gone, and the city was quiet around him the way cities are quiet late on November nights, which is not actually quiet at all, but is a different register of noise lower, further away, going about its own unrelated business. He took his phone from his pocket and looked at it and put it away without calling anyone. There was no call to make. The thing that needed to happen had happened, and what came after it was not a problem to be solved, but a question to be lived with, which was a distinction he had spent most of his adult life refusing to make and was only now beginning to understand. Upstairs, Nara set the folder and the envelope on her kitchen table. She set the ring beside them, on the bare wood, in the light. She stood and looked at all three for a long time. Then she put the kettle on and sat down and opened the envelope and began, slowly and carefully, to read. Outside, the city went on. She read for 2 hours. The documents were not easy reading. They were not written to be read by anyone who had a personal stake in them. And that distance, the bureaucratic, procedural distance of a record that treated a man's death as a logistical entry, was its own kind of violence. The particular cold violence of systems that process human lives without registering them. She read past it. She read every page twice. She found her father's name in 7 places across 3 documents. She found, on the last page of the longest document, a line that had been added in a different hand from the rest, slanted and smaller, as if written in a hurry or in private ring. Personal effects, retained. And a date. The date was 2 years after her father's death. She sat with that for a long time. 2 years after. Dominic would have been 18. He had found the file, and the ring had been there in the file, and he had taken it out and kept it against his chest for 12 years. And she thought about what it cost a person to do that, not penance. He had said it was not enough for penance, but something, a refusal to let the accounting go clean, a way of staying responsible to a thing that would have been easier for everyone to let become nothing. She did not know what to do with that. She was not sure she needed to know yet. She closed the last document and set it on the table and looked at the ring. It was a plain gold band, thin and worn, with the engraving on the inside that she had now read twice under the kitchen light M and E, which were her parents' initials, and a date in June of 2001, which was the year they had married. She had been born the following spring. He had been wearing this ring when he died. He had been thinking about going home. She picked it up and held it, and felt the weight of it, which was almost nothing, which was the weight of something that had been carried a long way by more than one person across more than one decade, and which had arrived, finally, here, in this kitchen, in the light, in the right hands. She thought about going to New Jersey. Not tomorrow, not this week. But the location was in the envelope, and the envelope was on her table, and at some point when she was ready, when she understood better what ready meant, she would go and stand in that place and do whatever it was you did when you finally found the thing you had been looking for, which she expected would not look like she had imagined it and would be its own kind of beginning. She thought about Dominic's face in the car when he said he loved you. The record is clear about that. He talked about you. The specific quality of that statement, which was neither comfort nor performance, but simply a fact being delivered by a man who had held it alone for a long time and had finally given it to the person it belonged to. She thought about what she was going to do next and found, for the first time in a long time, that she did not know, and that the not knowing felt less like being lost and more like standing at the beginning of a road she had not been on before, which was different, which was something. She put the ring down gently on the table. She got up and turned off the overhead light, leaving only the lamp in the corner. And the kitchen was quiet around her, and the city was quiet outside the window in its late-night way, and the ring sat on the table in the low light, neither lost nor returned, simply present, which was, for now, enough.